My name is Jasmine Fitzgerald, and I am 30 years old. And last Thanksgiving, I stood up at my parents' dinner table and said the words I had swallowed for 30 years. My mother raised her glass. For the second toast of the night, again for my sister. The doctor, I set down my napkin. I stood up, my chair scraped across the hardwood, and for the first time in my life, every head at that table turned toward me instead of her. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just told the truth before I tell you what happened next. Please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from now. Let me take you back 8 years. To a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon. Where someone taught me exactly what my worth was. Long before my family ever tried to tell me otherwise, my grandmother's kitchen always smelled like cinnamon and dish soap. A strange combination that somehow meant safety to me. I was 22, fresh out of a job I hated. Sitting on her cracked vinyl stool while she kneaded dough with hands soft from decades of work. "You know what I love about you, Jasmine," she said, not looking up from the counter. Flour dusting her forearms. "You finish things, doesn't matter what it is, you see it through." I laughed it off. It didn't feel like a compliment at the time, not next to Whitney's acceptance. Letter to medical school, which my mother had already framed and hung in the hallway. My grandmother's house had a specific creak on the third stair, and an old radio that only picked up one station, and a quilt on the back of her armchair that smelled like cedar. It was the only place in my family where nobody asked me why I wasn't more like my sister at my parents' house. Things were different, cold in a way that had nothing to do with the thermostat. My mother would introduce Whitney by her accomplishments and introduce me by my age. "This is Jasmine, she's 30. I didn't understand my grandmother's words, yet. Not the way I understand them now. I only knew that in her kitchen. I felt like enough, and in my mother's dining room, I never once did. My grandmother passed 2 years later. In the spring, quietly, the way she did most things at the funeral reception. I overheard my mother in the kitchen, talking to my aunt in a voice I didn't recognize, flat, already moving on. "Well, now we can finally sell the house. It's just sitting there depreciating. That's the word she used for a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon. That's the word they use for everything. That used to be love." I said nothing. I went outside and sat on the porch steps until the sun went down. And I filed that sentence away the same way I'd filed away every small cruelty before it. I started my cleaning company that same year, quietly. Without telling my parents until it was already profitable. I hired my first employee in a coffee shop parking lot. I bought my townhouse at 26 with a down payment I'd saved dollar by dollar. And I told no one at that dinner table how I'd done it to my mother. None of that existed. I was still just the daughter who cleaned houses. Said the same way she might say something distasteful. I let her believe whatever made her comfortable because somewhere in those 2 years, I understood something my grandmother had known all along. Being underestimated by people who never really looked at you means they never see what you're quietly building. And that, I realized, was the one thing they could never take from me. 6 months after the funeral, my grandmother's lawyer called and asked me to come in alone. Inside a small manila envelope was a handwritten letter. And a check that made my hands shake, money she'd saved for decades, left entirely to me with one line at the bottom. "Finish this one to her accountant," a calm, steady woman named Denise, who had handled my grandmother's affairs for 20 years. Sat across from me and explained the full truth. My grandmother had watched my business grow from a distance for 2 years, quietly proud. Never saying a word to my parents, she told me once, Denise said, that you were the only one in that family who built something with her own hands instead of waiting to inherit it. I sat with that for a long time. Weeks later, I overheard my mother on the phone with my aunt, already planning Thanksgiving seating. Already rehearsing another toast for Whitney's residency milestone. 14 people again. Same table, same joke, probably, dressed up in new words. I texted Denise 2 words. "I'm ready, not ready to fight, ready to stop shrinking." That week, My mother went to sleep certain that Thanksgiving would look exactly like every other year. It would not. Denise helped me understand something simple, but important. Closure isn't a legal document. It's a decision you make once and don't take back. You don't need permission to stop making yourself smaller, she told me. You just need to actually stop. My mother called 2 days before Thanksgiving. Her voice unusually warm. I hope you're bringing that pie again. Everyone loved it last year. No mention of the toast from the year before, no mention of anything. Ever, I'll think about it, I said. My cousin Mia, 23 and usually glued to her phone at these dinners, texted me privately that same week. You okay? You've been quiet lately. I told her I was fine. I wasn't sure that was true. The night before Thanksgiving, I drove out to my grandmother's old house, now empty. Keys still in my coat pocket from settling the estate. I sat on the porch steps where I used to sit as a girl, and I let myself finally cry, not because I was breaking, but because I finally understood what I was about to do. I wish this were different. I wish my mother had been the kind of parent who saw what I built instead of measuring it against my sister's white coat. I wish she had said my name with the same pride, but wishes don't hold up. What I have does at 11:50 p.m. I sat alone in my townhouse, the one I'd bought with my own hands. The papers from my grandmother's estate spread across the kitchen table. Denise called to finalize the last of the paperwork, transferring my grandmother's savings, closing out the final accounts. Once this is signed, it's fully yours, she said gently. No one can ever call it anything less than what you earned. I know, I said. I signed the last form. My hand steady. The clock read 12:03 a.m. I am 30 years old. I am, for the first time, fully and completely free of needing anyone's approval at that table and across town. My mother was almost certainly asleep, rehearsing tomorrow's toast in her mind. Certain nothing had changed. She would find out otherwise in about 14 hours. Thanksgiving dinner happened exactly the way it always did. My mother's good china out. 14 people crammed around the table. Whitney at the head like always. My mother stood for her second toast of the night, glass raised. The same words forming on her lips. I stood up too, my chair scraping against the hardwood, every head turning toward me instead of her. For the first time in 30 years, you can keep toasting Whitney all night if you want, I said, my voice steady, but you don't get to call me a maid at my own family's table. And then act surprised when I stop showing up to it. My mother's face went through embarrassment, defensiveness, and something close to shame. In the span of 5 seconds, she looked at me like I was still the daughter she thought she could laugh at. I wasn't. I hadn't been for months. I didn't gloat. I picked up my purse. And I walked out into the cold November air, breathing easier than I had in years. My grandmother used to say, "You finish things, doesn't matter what it is, you see it through." I always thought she meant my work ethic. She meant something deeper. That finishing also means knowing when to close a door that was never going to open for you. My mother called 3 days later. Not with an apology right away, but asking if we could finally talk, really talk, about what had been happening at every holiday for years. Denise still handles my finances. My grandmother's savings became the down payment on my second property this year. As for me, I still have the quilt from my grandmother's armchair, folded on the back of my own couch. I think about her every time I smell cinnamon, and I think, some people spend their whole lives waiting to be seen by people who never will, and some people simply stop waiting. If you've ever sat at a table where your own family made you feel small, tell me in the comments. I read every one of them, and if this story moved you, subscribe. There are more to come.